And we're recording. Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another episode of Witches and Wine. This is the show where we talk about witchy stuff and we drink wine. Clink and drink. And clink and drink. Yes. It's my favorite.
Yeah,
I haven't had this in a while. All right, I am your hostess with the mostest, Lola Stardust. And before we start, I like to do our little disclaimer. Our show is called Witches and Wine, meaning we do partake in drinking wine. And it has been brought to our attention that sometimes people don't enjoy watching these witches here drink wine and get a little tipsy.
I could not understand why anyone would ever have a problem with this.
But
it's pretty amusing.
If you do have a problem with that, there's this awesome thing in the corner of your screen. It's the X, and all you got to do is click that X, and we disappear.
Yep, you have the power.
You have the power to manifest your reality. It's witchcraft, my friends. It's witchcraft. All right. So before we get to one of our very favorite guests and his beautiful face on that screen, and I just want to hug him and pinch his cheeks. I can't wait till we see each other in person.
I know.
I'm going to turn this over to my husband, my high priest, my best friend, my ride or die.
Your ride or die.
Silent as Stardust, why don't you tell us about the wine that we're drinking?
I'd be happy to. Tonight I have chosen a French wine. It's from Luc Pirlet. We've had a couple of his wines on in the past. We really enjoy his series of wines. This is his Malbec. Mm-hmm. And Lola is always a big fan of the Malbec.
I love Malbec.
So I decided to have one of these because we haven't had one of these in a while on the show.
And I never complain.
No. And for those who don't know, Malbec is kind of like the in-between of a Cab and a Syrah. Where it has more tannins than a Syrah, but not as much as a Cab, and it's dark. It's dark like a Syrah and spicy, but not as earthy. This one is a French one, so no added sulfites. Lots of pepper, lots of spice, lots of dark fruits. All the things that we like in our wine.
We just described Roman.
Yeah. So yeah, just
peppery, spicy, and a dark fruit.
Yeah.
Oh, please.
Dark and spicy. So as you can see, we have our wonderful friend Roman back this evening.
Oh my God! I hope that did not offend you. It was done out of love.
He was laughing.
Okay.
He liked it so much he lost his thumbs.
All right.
So and a bottle's gonna run you $10 to $15, so very affordable.
Yeah. Sorry, I caught myself cracking up. Well, thank you, honey, for introducing mine. I will tell you that Malbec was one of the first kind of better wines that I discovered at Huckleberry's when they did. Huckleberry's is a natural food store here in Spokane, Washington. I don't know if they have them other places.
No, it's
is it us?
Yeah.
And they used to do wine tastings like every week, and they would pour you nice size samples of wine and then give you all these great cheeses to eat with them. And the lady, this was like what, 7 years ago, a long time ago, 7, 8, maybe 10 years ago. And the lady poured a Malbec and I drank it, and I wasn't really a big red wine fan. I think this might have been my introduction to red wine. So Malbec, love it, check it out, yummy, yummy, yummy. Okay, enough about the wine already. Let's talk about the witches. Our guest here, he's been on our show 2 times before. He's a repeat offender. We love him so much. We really do. Let's welcome the awesome Roman Delgado. Welcome.
Welcome back.
Hola, everybody.
Hola. First of all, love your vest. We were talking about that earlier. And your patches on there. Is that the Wolstenstein and the ATC?
Yep.
Yes, he's a student at the Wolstenstein talking about his sophomore year. Anyone out there that remembers their sophomore year
or is experiencing it currently,
I remember mine.
I remember hers too.
It's when I started drinking a lot. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, so he's going through that. He is busy. He is a healer. He's a shaman. This man has so many gifts and ways to connect with people on such a real level. Thank you for being here. We're going to talk about the rites of passage, correct? And the lack of that, and how that affects us as healers and whatnot. Would you care to just go ahead and start talking about it?
Well, my idea for a conversation starter for the rabbit hole to open up the rabbit hole
Yes. Yes.
is how in American culture in particular, we have a rampant epidemic of lack of rites of passage. Traditionally, in cultures, you will go from children to teenager, from teenager to young adult, from adult to parent, from parent to elder.
Yeah.
And all of those in traditional cultures all over the world, particularly indigenous people, they have a ritual that says, okay, you are no longer a little kid, or you are no longer a teenager, or you are no longer just a parent. And in normal culture, not necessarily in the pagan community, but in outside of the pagan community, there is not a lot of that.
No.
There is the idea that when you begin driving, you're a teenager, or when you have your first kid, you are no longer a teen, you're an adult, or when you get your gray hair, you become an elder.
Yeah.
But that doesn't always click in the minds of people.
No.
It doesn't. Any of us who have grown a little bit and been interacting with people have countlessly met so many people who are full-grown men and full-grown women, grown-ass people who should know better and should be getting a good hold of their lives, who act like they're 5, 10, 15 years old. And that carries a lot of dysfunction in their lives.
Yes.
And part of what I wanted to bring up here is, how does that affect the energy of people who are supposed to be psychics, healers, shamans, and especially pagan clergy?
Yes.
How do we successfully initiate our next generation of pagan clergy when our next generation of pagan clergy are children and teenagers in grown people bodies?
That is so true, because it stunts your growth if you don't have a celebration of it. And I feel that a lot of us pagans, unless you've been a pagan from the time you were born, which some have.
Yep.
But for me, I mean, I was raised in a pretty Christian family, and we didn't have those rites of passage. As a matter of fact, those rites of passages were shunned.
Yep.
And kind of like, oh, we don't talk about that. We, like, for example, when a girl starts her period, I think there should be some sort of rite of passage for that. But in my family, in the Christian belief and stuff like that, the bleeding was a sin. That was a sin. That was a symbol of sin. So I was ashamed of it. I think it causes shame. Don't you think so? Not just for that, but in any kind of rite of passage, if you don't have that, don't you think it causes shame, and that might be a big part of it?
It's a big part of it. It reminded me when you described that for a young woman,
Yeah.
In Mexican culture, we have the famous quinceañera.
Yes.
Everybody who's been familiar with Mexican culture or been around Mexicans heard about it. And this, when a young woman turns 15, they throw her a huge party, like a Sweet 16 in American culture, but it's a bigger deal. Because in the quinceañera, the young woman is told, now you have all of these grown people responsibilities with the family. And by the way, since you're 15 years old and you're processing things better, you have more mental capacity, you have more experience, you can start learning about dating.
Yes. Oh, jeez.
And that is the rite of passage for women in Mexico, to go from little girls to women as their quinceañera. And when they don't get it, you can tell. You can tell that they never got that acknowledgement from their family to be, you are not a woman. And the poor boys, oh my God. So many boys are such a huge mess because they don't get that.
Yeah.
Many years ago, when Mexican culture was a lot more traditional and more embedded within Catholicism, they treated the what is it called? The confirmation, the Catholic confirmation, as a rite of passage for young men.
Yes.
And for those of you not familiar with Roman Catholicism, when you're a little baby, you get baptized. You get introduced to the religion against your will, but that doesn't stay your whole life. In Catholicism, when you turn between 13 to 15 years old and you finish Sunday school, you finish Catholicism, you're supposed to willingly accept Catholicism if that's what you want. And you have a ritual that is called a confirmation.
Yep.
And that is when you receive a new name, you have a full ritual. But that is really dying a lot in Mexican culture and a lot of Latin American cultures, because a lot of people just don't connect with the Catholic Church anymore. So
Yeah.
even in Mexican and Latin American cultures, there is a lack of that rite of passage. And a lot of young women that I've talked to say that they don't want the quinceañera. They don't want that big party. They don't want a big deal made about them. And they don't seem to understand the role that it's supposed to play.
Well, it's the same. Well, first of all, my mother's Mexican, but she grew up a little different. She did have some of the traditions, but she also grew up with a single mother, and the single mom didn't have a lot of time to do these things and didn't have the money. I mean, this was a long time ago. My mother's 81 years old, 80 years old. Will be 81, so we're talking about, the 40s when
65 years.
Yeah, when she was a child or a young girl. They all had to work to help bring money into the family. So my mother, then she moved here to Spokane with my dad. And back then in the 60s, it was very white, very, very white. My dad's family is white. So those traditions, if she even wanted them, we didn't practice them here. That's why I didn't grow up with a lot of Mexican tradition. I did with some, but not as much as I would have liked to. What they don't understand, though, is it's more than just a party. It is a coming of age. And don't the Jewish,
your bar mitzvahs
and your bat mitzvahs,
which is a coming of age at 12 or 13 for boys and girls.
So why do you think that affects people when they don't have that celebration or that ritual? What does it do to them? What is it causing to them?
Well, it is the idea that ritual is more than just a party or more than just a ceremony at church. It is a psychodrama. It is psychological play that gets something inside your head. It is a shock to your mind that goes, holy shit, I am no longer 10 years old. I am no longer 12. I am growing up. And that clicks something in your mind that sets you up for the next stage in your growth.
Yes.
I read a book about this subject by an author called Alberto Villoldo. He practices shamanism. He's a scholar as well. And he wrote this book about how this subject, in particular in American culture, how he's seen people who had a difficult childhood, who never grew to teenagers because of that childhood. And we can touch on that because that's an important one.
Yes.
And how he got teenagers who never had I'm a teenager now. And they had, how he met many young men that even though they had children, they never grew out of their teenage years wanting to party and have a fast car and just do the fun.
Yeah.
And it took a major life event to shock them into the reality that they were no longer that young, youthful, happy-go-lucky teenager or child that they wanted to be. It's the idea that the rituals that we are missing in American culture do not give people the opportunity to have that mental switch in their minds be flipped and say, I am no longer a child, I'm no longer a teenager, I'm no longer and even when you get into your 20s, into your 30s or 40s, when you're in your parenting years, I am a full-grown adult, because each particular set of responsibilities that you have in those stages of life is completely different.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And if you do not get fully aware and invested in the idea that you have those responsibilities and you're still trying to live your life as the person you used to be in your younger years, your life is going to be a huge, gigantic motherfucking mess.
Oh, I wonder if that also is maybe, played a part in our lives. How we kind of, do you know what I'm saying? Like we held on to our party days for quite a long time to experience. And of course there's other things that play into it too. But I mean, I never had any rite of passage. Did you have anything that was like that, even in your Catholic upbringing?
No.
Or
well, I mean, you have to a small degree. You have your first communion. You have.
Did you have that stuff?
I had first communion. I did not go forward on after that.
Okay.
But there are little things that can be done to show a slight
Change or
growth,
transition.
in life, but it's minimal. Um, if you want to go back to classic Catholicism, that's when the boys were kept as boys, because when they got to a certain age, that's when the surgery happened.
The making them eunuchs,
Yes.
and all that stuff. Yeah.
And so they wouldn't allow them to go through the rites of passage and becoming a man, so to speak.
Yeah.
So there was the inverse of it.
I think that the trauma you would have with it is not only that you don't have that click in your head, but I think that it would make you psychologically feel like that next step in life isn't
attainable.
Well, but is almost shameful again. I keep coming up with the word shame. Maybe because in my family those things were shameful. Does that make sense?
Okay, let's go deeper with that idea that both of you just put forward, okay?
Okay.
And this is where Roman opens up. Okay?
Yes.
This is where I go no holds barred. Let's talk about everything. Since you already did that and put forth your examples.
Yeah.
I received my calling into shamanic healing as a child. It was one of my first experiences, one of my first memories. But my mother wanted nothing more in life than a normal little boy.
Yes.
And unfortunately for her, she got me. And she was very angry about it. My mother was an alcoholic prostitute with a horrible temper problem and a horrible drinking problem. Yeah. And her only joy in life was beating me to a bloody pulp and leaving me in a puddle of my own blood on the floor. Oh. And she openly hated me, you know. She told me that I was God's way of punishing her for many horrible things she had done in her past. Oh. Now, normally, people will say, well, go to therapy. But when somebody who's being called to service in a spiritual path in Mexican culture, in brujeria, curanderismo, and shamanism, that wound prevented me for so many years to embrace my path. Not only I could not be a teenager, and I had a lot of issues as a teenager that triggered her even more into being abusive, but when I became an adult, I rebelled against my calling incredibly for over 10, 15 years. Yeah. Because in my mind, I was still a tiny little boy that wanted nothing more than his mother to love him. Yes. So when we have this energy of parents putting that energy of shame over growing up, or shame over being a child that is not what they expected, we don't get to become teenagers. Or if we go into teenagehood, we have issues that stay with us until adulthood. Yes. And that's the energy when we're no longer even adults. There is that wounded inner child that continues to drive our lives. The director of the Last Mask Center for Shamanic Healing, Christina Pratt, has a podcast about shamanism called Why Shamanism Now? Oh. And she has an entire series of podcasts about the wounded inner child. And this is part of what got me thinking about that, about this particular subject. And that's part of the energy within shamanism and within priesthood in pagan culture. It is not just that we don't have rites of passage. It is that we have generations and throes of witches who come into witchcraft and into paganism because they are wounded. Yes. You don't need to be initiated if you're wounded. You need a healer if you're wounded. Mm-hmm. There is a huge difference. Because until you are healed, you are going to be stuck in that moment, in that age, in that second when you were wounded, being that little child or being that teenager or being that young woman in that abusive relationship that in their mind, they never got out of it. And because of that, you're never going to be successfully initiated. You're never going to be a shaman. You're never going to be a psychic. You're never going to be a healer. You're going to be playing the role of a healer, but the person playing that role is not going to be you. It's going to be that inner child that never grew up.
Well, there is a psychological term of arrested development.
Yes.
Where you never got to grow and go to the next step because you were stunted, and your development was arrested. It was stopped.
Yeah.
It was prevented from you being able to move on.
That happens with drugs too.
Yep.
Drugs, when you start using drugs at a young age, and then you sober up from it, you're actually at that age that you were when you started using the drugs. So if you started using heavy drugs at 15, and then let's say you sober up 10 years later at 25, you're still that 15-year-old because it stunts your psychological and emotional growth.
You got to experience all those years that you numbed.
Yeah. So I've seen that, I've experienced that. Do you think that's why, and I hate to use this word, you were talking about saying wounded, so we'll say wounded. There are so many witches that do come to the craft that are wounded. Do you think the craft attracts them because they think, of course they find out later, but they think that, oh, this will heal them because, it's witchcraft and all this, but what they don't realize is that wounded child in them, that's where the shadow work comes in, right? They have to do that shadow work, and I have seen this happen so many times as a priestess and trying to help people. Is there is this resistance to the shadow work, and this is helping me maybe understand the different, that there's that wounded child, right? So that's a big part, right? Is that they don't want to do that shadow work.
Well, I know a lot of people are drawn in because it's fun to be a witch, or it's perceived to be fun.
But it's hard work.
But when you're actually trying to work the craft, and whether it's a witch, as a shaman, or whatever, it's a lot of soul searching, and it's a lot of getting down to roots of things. And, not a lot of people are willing to take those steps and do the healing necessary and this exploration necessary to grow from those.
I had a coven sister a long time ago that I was trying to clergy and elevate, and when I laid out the shadow work aspect, I don't think it was a coincidence that shortly after that they decided to leave the coven. So this is helping me realize I believe that wound within us. A lot of people say a lot of witches are broken people. I like the word wounded better than broken. Broken, I feel like you're a toy. So I like that you use the word wounded. But that's a big part of it, right? Is that they aren't willing to heal that child because of that lack of rites of passage, and they won't do the shadow work to help them, right?
Well, this is where you trigger the shamanic killer in me. Okay. This is when he comes out full force.
Yes.
I've had so many people in my life when they found out that I come from a family of brujos, of sorcerers, not just shamans, but hardcore black magicians.
Yes.
In Mexican style of magic, who go, please teach me what you know. Recently, in the last couple of years, I had a young man who wanted me to teach him what I know about necromancy.
Yeah.
And I get so many of them coming to me for this. And in the last 20 years that I've opened myself up to my community about my family's practices, not once have I met one of them that was genuinely called to the path. Really? And when I looked at them, I asked them, why are you seeking power? Why are you powerless? And they get mad at me, and they fuss and they hurl, they snarl, and they bulk up if they're men, and they get all angry. And this is, why the fuck are you telling me I'm powerless? I am strong, I am powerful, I can kick your ass right now. And I look at them and go, only the truly powerless thirst for power the way you do.
Oh.
And that is the point of why people don't do the shadow work, because they lack their power. In shamanic cultures, when we are traumatized, be it by other people's actions or by our own actions, as you spoke about taking drugs, there's a piece of our soul that is our power animal. The Coast Salish tribes call it totem. Here in Washington State, in Western Washington, by the Puget Sound, that's where the term totem animal came from.
Yeah.
My ancestors, the Aztecs, called it your tonali. That's where my business is called Teotl Tonali, divine spirit. So there are many names all over the world.
Yeah.
It is a cross-cultural concept. Not every culture has it, but most do.
Yeah.
And when you are in a trauma space, that power, that animal that is the embodiment of all of your good, powerful, and wise and strong qualities, runs away screaming because it got hit bad. It took as much of the damage for you as it could, and it left to lick its wounds, and it left you powerless. It left you wounded. How many times have you met someone who was traumatized, let's say that they were abused? Let's look at the most obvious wound that most women in Western culture have, and that is assault.
Yes.
How many women felt powerless against their attackers, and they never recovered that power?
Yes.
And that confrontation, when you said you need to do shadow work about your wounding, triggers that instant again of being powerless. And they remember being powerless. They remember their trauma and they run because they have not enough power to confront the wound. So from a shamanic perspective, before you do shadow work, you empower them to do the shadow work. You bring back their power, and then you give them the choice. Now that you're powerful again, are you willing to face your demons and grow the fuck up?
Yeah. That makes so much sense. And there's so many that you need to get to the root of what that wound is. And I know you as a healer, and you deal with ancestral wounds, things that have passed on in our life. But we're right now, I mean, we could go on about that. We've gone on with that before us talking. But you're talking about what I think is a simple act of a rite of passage. And so what do you think we should do, or we can do, with these people who are, like you say, grown-ass men and women? We can give them a rite of passage, right? We can perform that. Well, we do that with initiation. We do that, right? That's an initiation.
But he's coming outside of the pagan path.
Well, but a lot of them come into our path, though. That's the thing, is we deal with these people. Like I said, I haven't been pagan from the time of birth, so I grew up in a family that put shame on those rites of passage. There was shame on me becoming a woman. There was shame on me even when I got pregnant in my 30s. There was you're not ready for that. There was no celebration. It was, how are you going to do this? Because I wasn't married, and I was sober for a year, so the family members thought, you're not ready for this. There was no celebration and no honoring that transition. I didn't get any of that. So there's a lot of wounds that come along with that. And like I said, there's this shame. Like I was taught, well, I've worked through a lot of the shame, but that was a huge part of it. What can we do as healers, priests, priestesses? Is there a ritual or an initiation for a grown ass man and woman that we can offer them?
One of the first things that I encountered working with the Aquarian Tabernacle Church at festival that really struck me beautifully about this particular subject was the mystery tents. The women's tent, the red tent, the green tent, the men's tent, and the rainbow tent, the purple tent for the non-binary people.
Yes.
Because that is such a huge part of that. Having that support from people who identify of the same gender as you, who may have had the same experiences. So for pagans and Wiccans and members of the pagan community, the first step, the small step, is to create those spaces. The men's tent, the women's tent, and the non-binary tent.
Or rainbow tent, whatever you want to,
whatever you want to call it, for people.
That's what I do. I do a local, here in town, I do a local red tent.
And introduce those subjects to the tent.
Yes, and it's very healing. It's very
introduce those subjects to the tent.
Yeah.
For me, my healing in my stunted growth, because I did not have the rites of passage and my mother was abusive, came through life. When I was around 16 years old, my mother decided to let me go meet my father and come live with him here in the United States, where I was born, before she kidnapped me. Because that's how I ended up in Mexico. She kidnapped me.
Wow.
And the woman he was living with, that I'm not going to go into the relationship. Her name is Joe, and I don't have her permission to talk about her life. So I'm not going to. I don't want to cross boundaries with family.
Absolutely.
But
Respect.
in the 3-4 years that I lived with both my father and her, she was more of a mother to me than my own blood mother.
Mhm.
Till the day, I don't acknowledge my birth mother as my mom. On Mother's Day, I call her.
Yes.
And that energy of having been acknowledged as someone, as part of a family, as being loved the way a child should be loved, allowed me to click into my teenage years. And I lived my teenage years very quickly. And I started catching up.
Yeah.
And it took me a good 10, 15, 20 years to completely catch up, but I caught up.
You caught up.
And part of it is community.
That helped you heal, was that having that, even that supportive mother figure.
And part of it is not only having those spaces like our women's tent and our men's tent and our LGBTIQ plus tent.
Yeah.
You know, it's having the supportive people who help us identify, where are we stunted?
Yes.
Where was that stunted growth? And how do we heal that as a community? Because when it comes to the energy of having been spiritually stunted to the point in which we cannot function as priesthood or as healers, it's going to take a whole community to get us back to health.
Yes.
And that is part of why so many people are terrified of organized paganism. Because it gets them to confront that wounding, that wounding of, my mother was very conservative Christian, or my father was a preacher and they treated me horribly.
Yeah.
And I would have to go back. And again, that loss of power, you cannot confront the wound without that power. So my idea is twofold: not only having those spaces, the women's tent, the men's tent, and the LGBTIQ plus tent, but having the coven healer be versed on how to empower the members of their community to take that next step into doing the shadow work. Because that is part of the work that a lot of modern day pagans are missing. Because as pagans, we have been disconnected from our ancestral roots. Yeah. Ancestral paganism has been wiped out by conservative Christianity, both in the Middle Ages and in modern Western culture. So a lot of this type of healing that was indigenous to Europe, where most pagans come from in ancestry, has been lost. So you need to have training for this coven healers and clergy who are doing the healing for their covens and for their, whatever you call your group as a pagan, to re-empower your group and your individuals who are wounded like that. They have the strength to get through the work. Because if you're not empowered, being disempowered, being powerless and doing shadow work could fucking kill you.
Yeah. If they're not ready for it. Yeah. And like we've talked about this before, me and Silenus don't have a real connection to our ancestors because we don't know, we don't
hear a bunch of stories.
No one's kept in touch. That those stories have been, we have very different family ties with our past. There's adoption on his side, a father that wasn't present. On mine, it's just, I don't know what happened to the stories. I don't know what happened to the honoring of those great grandparents, or those, I don't know anything about any of them. So that's something that we have talked about, that lacks. We feel that lack of connection when you talk about ancestors and that lineage.
Or the calling to find out more about them, because I've heard so little of the stories.
We don't even know
that I don't have anything excited to find out about Aunt whomever, Gertrude.
Yeah.
Great Aunt Gertrude. Don't know anything about any great aunts or great uncles or anything. Don't have any of those generational stories that we grew up with.
And I know that that's kind of going off topic, but you bring up ancestral wounds. You're very versed in this. that's where a lot of it starts too. There's no connection. There's no roots for our tree that we're trying to grow. Um, so we just feel like we're the roots, and then anyone after us, and we're trying to make strong roots. You know what I mean?
You know what? Let's fucking go there, because
Okay, let's
that's the rabbit hole. Okay, let's go for this rabbit hole too, because
yes.
that's what we do in Witches and Wine. We drink wine and we go into rabbit holes.
We go down rabbit holes. Clink and drink to rabbit holes. Yes. As long as there's not rabbit poop in there.
You know, this has the potential to be an ancestral wound. How many families do you have in which every single man in the family is a drunken party guy who acts like a 15-year-old?
Well, I feel like I'm being judged.
Dad, your biological father.
He was looking awful square at me when he was saying these words. I feel like it's just pouring right into my soul.
His biological father, who he never knew, because his biological father was a probably stunted drug abuser and left the family. It was just him and his mother. His mother was adopted. Her parents died, right? So there was this lack of connection. So he's staring at you because this is a very strong thing for him.
If you want at a future time, you know, in a few months, once you have more guests like that, you don't oversaturate the air with me. We can have an entire show exclusively on generational wounds and how to heal them.
Yes, that would be great.
Here on the, I believe is towards the end of the month, around the 27th, I think, you know, one of the last weekends of the month.
Yeah.
With Seattle Psychics Association, I'm going to be doing a class online
on
ancestral curses and how to heal them, how to understand them, how if it's a new curse, you know, if you're just getting started in that pattern, how can you get out of it? Or if it's something that is very entrenched, when is it time to ask for help? So I'm going to be teaching a class on that.
And also, you deal with this as your profession, and he could just.
It is actually the center point. It is the meat and potatoes of my practice as a shaman.
Yeah. That would be really interesting. For you to maybe book an appointment with him and get that figured out. Because I think, like I said, I know it's off the topic, but it's wounds. It's wounds. Still, we're talking about wounds.
And if you're disconnected from your ancestors, be aware that there's more to ancestry than just blood.
Oh, yeah. I have a grandmother who was not blood, but she was my grandmother, and she passed. But I get a lot of ancestral energy from her. Yeah. And she was a very spiritual woman. Definitely not my path of spirituality, but
definitely spiritual.
And you know, she worried about all of our souls until the day she died, and you know, she sent us holy water and crucifixes and other things,
and a pamphlet that she typed out what to do for end of days.
Yes.
And a special candle to burn. We saved all of that. I've got her holy water up on my west. On my
if you're adopted, your adopted family, their ancestry is your ancestry. You know, I had a client once who says, I have no ancestry. I grew up in the foster care system. I bounced from house to house my entire childhood. I have no foundation in life as a child. And I asked her, what do you do for a living? And she goes, I'm a psychoanalyst. And it's like, are you, I asked, she told me that she was a Jungian psychoanalyst. And I told them, well, Carl Jung is your ancestor.
Yeah.
You know, when you have an ancestral author, get a picture of Carl Jung and put it in there. Yeah. I had members of the Aquarian Tabernacle Church ask me, is Pete Pathfinder Davies my ancestor? And the answer is yes. He is your spiritual ancestor.
Yes.
So,
and
if
that's
why healing an ancestral path, you can call on your ancestors in path, or your ancestors in your adopted family, or in your community. Anyone who had a role in helping you become who you are today, who is in spirit, who is in the afterlife, is your ancestor.
And I think that's why I have such a calling to. I have a very, even before I had children, I was referred to as the mama type, the mother type, because I want to make sure that everyone is taken care of and has somewhere safe to come. I have always wanted to be that person that provides maybe what they didn't get at home.
That is part of the energy of priesthood for the pagan community. You know,
Yes.
how many priests and priestesses are mommy and daddy for their coven?
Yes.
Because so many of us who come to Wicca have come to Wicca or paganism looking for that parental figure in God and Goddess that we never had as children.
Exactly.
It always looks back to those woundings, those early woundings in life that stunted our growth, that we as healers, and in cases of clergy, in the clergy, need to be able to help us heal.
I think that I want to ask you, because you're very wise and I'm interested in what you think about this. Why does the word shame keep coming to my vocabulary when I talk about rites of passage? Have you heard that before with others, or is it just how I was raised?
Truthfully,
Yeah.
you remember when you were speaking of shadow work?
Yes.
It's time to do the shadow work of shame. You know, I've been learning that our own drama, our own negative talk that we keep spewing out over and over and over again has a point. You know, that's part of sophomore year at the seminary at Wolstenstein.
Yes.
And one of the things I've been working on myself is taking accountability of my negative thoughts, whether they're memories or sayings or fears or whatever it is. What is the point of them? Are they trying to accomplish something for me? Are they trying to teach me something? Or are they pointing something out? And that's part of the shadow work. So
Absolutely.
for you, I would suggest, what is the shadow behind shame? Shame is the symptom. Shame is the blood spewing out of a wound. What is the wound that is still open that you are ashamed of? That is the real question.
That's a big part. And I know I need to do, there's a lot of shame that I have. I mean, I trust me, I do know how to do my shadow work. I've been doing it even before I came to being a witch. I was doing shadow work. I had to become sober off of those hard drugs, because that's part of recovery. They don't call it shadow work, but anyone who's watched this show before, and I'm very open about it, that was a big part of recovery. But the shame,
What you may have gotten, you may have worked some of your shadows, but you have other shadows that are not.
I know, I'm not saying all my shadows have been worked. It's a continuous cycle. But this topic, I kept, and I even had the vision of on Game of Thrones.
I was like, do I need to get
Dang.
I was like, do I need to get a bell and need you through the town naked?
Oh gosh, did you ever watch Game of Thrones?
I have seen that clip in a lot of places. They even made a funny commercial out of it.
So yes, so obviously this talk is bringing up because I've been using the word shame. That word is I can see it. It's almost like, Sesame Street, when they show the word, how to pronounce it. I'm seeing it in weird letters, shame. It's very strange to me. I'm like, why is this coming up? Shadow work, gotta do.
Let's go deeper into this, okay?
All right.
Let's talk about it from my perspective, from a shamanic perspective, and then you can bounce off my ideas from the perspective of priesthood. Does that work?
Absolutely. You do.
When we get to this point, okay, that there is a certain degree of a memory that just won't go the fuck away, and something triggers it, and it keeps cycling through over and over and again. That is the epitome of shamanic wounding, a shamanic illness.
Okay.
And it points to us the points in our lives when we have experienced trauma. Because we have little pieces of our soul, and when we were traumatized, when we were, in your case, perhaps shamed, never left that spot. In non-ordinary reality, in the spiritual, they are left behind, continually and perpetually experiencing their moment of shame.
Is that soul retreat?
That is the spiritual experience version of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay.
And when we have been traumatized, or when we have been spiritually stunted, soul loss, susto, as we call it in Spanish, or espanto, depending on how severe it is when our soul has checked the fuck out, or either run to its happy place, or in some cases been stuck in the time and place in which it was traumatized, experiencing this trauma over and over again, and we never get over it. Some people think that this type of energies are blockages in our energy system. While that might be partially true, that when an opening in our soul happens because the soul left piece, a soul piece left, and now we have the energy of soul loss in that space, an illness in that space. When we clean it, that space still empty. And we need to put that soul piece back. And that goes back into power animal retrieval, to feeling powerful enough again to confront those memories and heal them. And then in soul retrieval and bringing back the pieces of you that made you feel the shame of being a woman.
Yes.
And reclaiming them. However, I got to tell you, as a shamanic healer, in shamanic healing, soul retrieval is the spiritual equivalent of brain surgery.
Okay.
It is very difficult. You know, it's one of those things that I've seen a lot of people go, oh my God, I read this book the other day that had a soul retrieval meditation. Or when I hear people go, oh my God, I watched this guided meditation on YouTube and I retrieval my soul pieces. Or the worst one yet, I saw this spell online that told me that I could light a white candle in a completely pitch black room and call all my soul pieces back. I cringe and I cry.
Yeah,
That's a lot to go wrong. Soul retrieval is one of the most difficult forms of shamanic healing. And if you have it done, it should be done by a trained and experienced shaman or priest or priestess. People who know. Huh?
What if I stay at a Holiday Inn Express?
I don't get it.
Those are the commercials where they act like they're specialists because they stayed at a Holiday Inn Express, like they have all the knowledge. He understood what I was going.
Okay, so with that said, because this is and this is why I'm very open. I'm an open book about what I've gone through and whatnot. To be a better priestess and to be a better clergy, I talk very freely about where my wounds are and that. And this has been something has been coming up, is this shame of being a sexual being, this shame of, and I really think it has a lot to do with not celebrating that. And that comes back to the rites of passage, because you do need to celebrate it. I know it's more than just a party, but that celebration is such a great acknowledgement of saying you are now this, or you have transitioned to this. I never got those because I have very conservative. I love my parents. Don't get me wrong. They're still alive. I take care of them quite a bit. So this isn't about blaming everything on the parents, but this is how I grew up. They were very conservative. They were very prude. You don't talk about sex. You don't talk about periods. The birds and the bees talk. This was my birds and bees talk. It was, don't have sex till you get married.
We were talking about rites of passage in our society. The illusion of your virginity is, in a sense, a rite of passage.
It's a rite of passage too, and you should
because people are always asking, oh, are so and so still a virgin? When you're in junior high school, college, whatever the time where you experience that in your life.
And maybe it'll make, because I grew up with lots of girls that just wanted to get rid of their virginity, like it was almost like a.
It was a curse.
It was a curse or something. So and then they would never talk about it. And a lot of girls lost their virginity in assault type situations, but they never discussed it because it was like, well, I lost it, I'm okay with that. So this is also the importance of a rite of passage. If you put a value on what you're transitioning from and what you're transitioning to, it makes it healthy. You have a healthy relationship with that, right? Thumbs up.
Yeah, well, it goes beyond that. When you don't have a rite of passage that causes you to get stunted, when you don't celebrate becoming a man or becoming a woman or becoming a parent or an elder, that piece of you that should have grown up and become the new you is disassociated from the reality of the present you. Yes. It is very similar to soul loss. It is not the same, but similar.
It's similar. Yeah. Yeah.
Because then you have what, I talk about that shamanic teacher, Christina Pat.
Yeah.
She calls it the highly skilled wounded child.
Highly
It is a
skilled
little
child. Okay.
the highly skilled wounded child. And it's a little child that has many skills to cope with adult situations and to live an adult life. But that doesn't change the fact that they're a child.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And that they should not be living an adult life. And that dissonance between the two creates the symptoms not only of power loss, but of soul loss. How many times have you seen children who have been traumatized try to act like adults?
Oh,
And
yeah.
and it looks so wrong, and it creates so much issues for them and so much dysfunction, not only through their childhood but through their adult years.
Mm-hmm.
So it is that important of the healing work, of the work of the healer within the pagan community, because that's also an archetype and a role within the Wiccan and the healers and the pagan path that is being lost.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be trained to be the coven priest or priestess or the coven's maiden or the coven's or the coven summoner or whatever else. How many covens do still have the coven healer? The coven, the person that specializes on healing, and that's something that we as pagans need to start bringing back. Because if we don't have someone who's going to heal and empower someone to the point in which they are so empowered and so healthy that they can step forward into that rite of passage, that initiation that we're going to provide for them, everything is going to be moot because they're not going to be ready for it.
Exactly.
It is that missing role within the pagan community of the clergy specialized in healing that is needed. That is the missing piece of the puzzle that we came up with as part of this conversation.
You just got the ball rolling in my head of things that we need to put in practice in our coven in the future and creating that role, because the coven healer is something that is necessary. You had the medicine man, the shaman, the wise woman in all these cultures that, or the cunning woman or wherever that knew how to heal, and people would go to them, whether it was an animal bite or a fever or whatever the ailment was.
Yeah.
We have doctors now, but we don't have doctors on call.
Yeah.
Most of us, that we have to wait 2, 3, 4 hours instead of being able
or
to
days sometimes,
or get no help at all. Where we need to create that role within our circles, within our communities, that is available.
Well, it also brings to mind, and we've got a few minutes left because this hour has gone by so quick, because
As it always does.
As it always does, and it's especially with you, Roman, because we could go on and on and on. We try to keep it around an hour-ish. So if we go over a little, it's okay. But this brings to mind real quick, and anyone who watches this, if you feel, I like to say this, if you feel like you're being called out, you might be being called out. So I'm not doing it. I mean, I don't know what else to say.
There is no names. There is no one where
we're
thinking of anyone in particular.
But if you feel that this speaks to you in a way that, like, oh, then maybe, But what I'm saying is, there's a lot of witches out there, a lot of pagans. The majority of them that I've met in my life are, I'm a healer, 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 I'm a healer. That's what they say, I'm a healer. Now, I'm not here to question their healing abilities, but I think this is important to talk about because, like you said, to be a healer,
you have to be healed.
You have to be healed, or at least acknowledge those parts of yourself that are not healed. Because if you, right? So, yeah.
I think we just hit a rabbit hole of something that look on the expression on your face.
Yeah.
Big rabbit hole that we could do an entire show on.
Yes.
And that's the concept in not only shamanism, but Reiki and all the whole healing world. Okay.
Yeah.
We have all of these healers since the 1960s when the baby boomers discovered spirituality.
Yeah.
And they call it the path of the wounded healer. How many spiritual people have heard that term, the wounded healer, the wounded healer, the wounded healer?
Yeah.
I
And
never-
every single little pagany, witchy,
Yeah.
new agey person who I have encountered that says, I'm a wounded healer because I'm in pain and I know what that feels like. And I just want to go, oh dear God, not again. Because the wounded healer is not someone who understands pains because they are in pain. The wounded healer is someone who has been deeply, majorly wounded, and in a word that we don't like to use in the show, broken, who
Yeah.
has put themselves back together and healed and done the shadow work and the healing work and all the hard, grueling work that takes to be both a healer and a witch and a priest or priestess.
Yes.
And then they learn powerful life lessons and acquire powerful tools to help themselves. And they go, you know what, this lesson and this skill that I learned to help myself, I can use it to help that person over there who's in pain.
Yes. Yes.
That is the wounded healer.
Okay.
That is the energy that a lot of these people that you're watching who's saying, I am a healer, are trying to get to, but they don't know any better because there's a misconception in the healing community, in the spiritual community, in the pagan community, hell, even in the New Age community, about what the role of the wounded healer is.
Yes.
You cannot be a wounded healer and be still wounded. You have to be over the wound to do so.
And I want to do healing work, but I've always questioned it because I know I still have things that I need to work on.
He's so there's natural healers, and I am a witch that I'm very much about, not all witches have to be healers, right? Just like not all witches need to be herbologists. Not all witches need to know everything about crystals. It's nice to know something about these things. But I've never, my healing, when I heal people, I don't call myself a healer. Okay. But I know I heal people with making them laugh. And to me, I'm okay with that because I've had many, many people say, I needed that laugh today. I needed that smile. I needed that. And that is my healing. I've always been that way since I was a kid. I make people laugh. I make them feel good. That's how I heal. But I don't proclaim to be a healer. I look at my husband and he has natural healing abilities. I think he could really be a great healer. So there's a difference. Don't you think so?
Well, let's go into that, okay, real quick, because we're almost out of time.
Yeah,
You brought a beautiful point, okay? Not everybody has to be an expert on everything.
exactly.
So if you feel that you have, let's say, healed your wound with chemical dependency, okay? And you're clergy, you can help the people in your coven and in your larger community spiritually supporting them for chemical dependency.
Yeah.
But let's say that they come to you with issues healing the spiritual components of PTSD, and you never heal that on yourself. You can go, do you see that healer over there? He's done that shit.
Yes. Yes.
Because that's something that a lot of healers in the healing world don't know how to do. They keep taking on every single wounded person that comes to them to try to help them, especially our empaths. That's a huge empath thing to do.
Yes.
Empaths, with that compassionate side that they have,
Yes.
they want to heal everybody. And normally they end up taking on cases that they can't handle.
Or they make themselves sick. They actually make themselves physically ill because they just take on so much of it. And I've learned that. I'm like, look, just because I'm a witch doesn't mean I need to be all of this. I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm not familiar with, but that's okay.
Well, see, and that is a sign of a witch that has successfully been initiated. It is a sign that you grew up, that you took your wounding, you faced it, then you did your shadow work, and then when it was time for initiation, the initiation happened, and that triggered the series of events that helped you grow into your priesthood.
Yes.
If you had not had done all that, you will still be that young little empath taking on everything because you didn't know it better.
Yes.
And that is part of the path. That is part of what we're talking about. It
Yeah.
is part of the lesson that you learn through this series of initiatory practices that you need to be properly grown up to do.
Well, oh my gosh, Roman, we could talk Oh, you are so
For
amazing.
hours, for
Oh,
days.
that's why we just need to get in person and open up wine,
We-
sit around the living room and just talk.
We just need to be in contact for a couple days in person without any extraneous activities to allow us to prevent us from getting the connections that we obviously need to do.
Yeah, and you're just wonderful. We love having you on the show. You're amazing. I'm gonna go ahead and your links are going to be in the description of the show. I have your links and whatnot from previous
Episodes.
Also, the Seattle Psychic Association. Their links will be in there as well. Before we go, if anyone is interested, any of our viewers is interested in what we do, if you have any suggestions for topics for the show, you can email us at
crossroadscoven@gmail.com.
What was that again?
That was crossroadscoven@gmail.com.
So thank you, Roman. You have been amazing. Thank you so much. I wish we could do 2-hour shows, but I don't know if people would pay attention for that long because ADD. I don't know. But thank you so much.
Well, it's also witches on wine, you know. By the time the 2-hour mark hits, they might be plastered.
I was gonna for me personally, yeah, may not make it to 2 hours. Everyone,
We'd have to bring a Magnum bottle for that episode.
remember, everyone, please be very, very kind to each other. Always walk with the goddess. And until next time, blessed be. Thank you so much, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye, everybody.